Hey guys, welcome back. Baconfly here, and today we're going to be talking about the number one topic on everyone's mind: who trades cryptocurrency, stocks. Is the US government ever going to be able to get out of debt? And, that's something I ask myself all the time. Knowing about Dave Ramsey and kind of what he does, what he spreads about debt, and the country as a whole, has generally been Christian since its inception, or at least some form of related religion to Christianity. And Dave Ramsey does have a point. If you're Christian, and you read the Bible does say things about avoiding debt because the borrower is slave to the lender. Sure, okay. So why isn't the government following their own beliefs? Well, is there any way for the government to get out of debt? And I'm going to show you that there quite possibly may be, and some of the mistakes that we have been making as a society, trying to measure debt in our society, trying to measure how to get rid of it, how to pay it off. And let's dive in. We're going to start with the financial report of the United States government. This was posted by, the Government Accountability Office. And this report is free. You can check it out online. So if we scroll down, I think it's right here, 19th page of this document. And it does talk about, this report gives a non-biased view of the financial reports that the United States government posts, because it's like a separate affiliated organization, kind of like, the FHA or like the FCC. It's like federally run, but it's not directly connected to the government, where they're going to make false claims, they're going to put in false information. This report is based off of, third party as possible as they can make it. And so you can even read here, it says the long-term fiscal projections, it says debt to GDP will rise to 623% over the next 75 years. And it will continue to rise thereafter if current policy is kept in place. So with coronavirus, we printed $2.3 trillion of extra just money, and we added 50% extra to our yearly costs. And now that's that's represented if the government keeps printing stimulus to avoid market crashes, which is why they print money to begin with, aka quantitative easing, aka stimulus. If the government keeps doing that, obviously, debt to GDP is going to rise. Now, this is one crucial mistake that our nation has made since, we started measuring GDP, is that in order to get out of debt, we need to stop thinking about, income or debt to GDP. Because the GDP, it's kind of hard to measure GDP, and we don't even know if we can even be accurate with our GDP. Like, what are you going to do? You're gonna have the IRS literally take everyone's tax income, all the business tax income for on its face value. No, because not all companies bring all their money back to the USA. Yeah, sure, US companies generate a lot of money, but they're not keeping it in the US. And if they are, they're not spending it. Like, Apple doesn't even want to spend money on their new campus. They literally took out loans to pay for the campus because the interest payments were less expensive than just paying it off, which doesn't make any sense because you're still paying interest. And interest costs money. Like, borrowing money costs money. So it doesn't make sense that you wouldn't just pay with cash, because cash is less expensive. And they're going by the mentality that you can borrow money and then reinvest it at a better rate, which is sort of true, but it's a lot riskier because you have potential market crashes, right? So back to this article, you know, debt to GDP was hit 100% in September 30th, 2020. That's what it says right here. September 30th, 2020 was 100%. It also continues to say that the primary deficit is the difference between non-interest spending and receipts. So basically printing stimulus. Primary deficit projections along with those interest rates and GDP determine the debt to GDP ratio projections. And it talks about 2008, 2009, the housing crisis, the financial crisis. Talks about how it was kind of, this issue was kind of birthed from that era, which isn't true. The reason why we had this insanely high, printing a stimulus was because of the late 1980s. We had the chairman of the Federal Reserve in the late 80s had this idea that, wow, if we printed money, we could get ourselves out of financial situations. And his name was Alan Greenspan. It was the guy. Yeah, that's him. So Alan Greenspan, he came up with the idea of stimulus and quantitative easing. And so he bailed us out when there was a large market crash during the 1980s. And so with that, other federal chairmans or Federal Reserve chairmans have been following in his footsteps. And the major one that came out was during the war with Iraq and the attack on the Twin Towers, because George W. Bush decided that he needed more resources for the Department of Defense, the Patriot Act, and he needed to wage war on, the Taliban and other extremist groups. And so he had the government print, I think it was like $1 trillion. It was $1 trillion bill to begin the war of Iraq. And, that in of itself was one of the major quantitative easing measures that we saw. And it just built up from there. Now, with 2008, 2009, it was about $600 billion to bail out all the banks. The major banks. It didn't bail out any small banks. As we print more money, not only are we going to start seeing, increased spending, increased inflation, we're going to start digging ourselves in a hole that we can't get out of. And it actually, if debt to GDP rose by 623% over the next 75 years, how are we going to get ourselves out of debt? Because our income is not equal to GDP. The United States government's income is not equal to that. So if we look at the balance right here, it says, U.S. revenue, the government tax revenue is only $3.46 trillion. Oh my gosh. And so that was in 2019. It looks like they haven't updated 2020, but the point is that if you have $27 trillion in debt, as shown right here, net position, okay, how are you going to get yourself out of debt if you only make $3.4 trillion from income tax? And keep in mind, in order to increase wages and increase technological advances, you need to keep printing money. So they have to cut down on spending, keep printing money to support wage growth, to support, stock market growth. They have a really hard job ahead of them. And so there are some things that the United States government, we can talk about that now, that they can do to cut on expenses. So some of the things that they can do to cut off on expenses, if we look above here in the results and brief highlights section. So 16% goes to Social Security Administration. Now, 6.2% gets taken out of your paycheck and given to the government, and 6.2% comes from your employer. Your employer pays the other half of the 12.4% of Social Security. And that goes towards the government as well. It just, the business pays for it, right? What you could do instead is, instead of Social Security, you could just have 401ks. And so the business has to maintain your retirement account, which is totally plausible because that's what businesses already do. You just, instead of giving the government the responsibility to handle it, you would give the businesses the responsibility. And what would happen is, instead of investing it in government securities, you could invest it in stocks, or other, securities outside of the US government. That would cut down on 16% of all expenses for the US economy. So that would take out 16% of $7.4 trillion, which is $1.18 trillion. So you could take out $1.18 trillion worth of spending if you had financial institutions and businesses manage your retirement accounts, which are kind of already done, 401k, right? That's not that wild of a concept. The only problem is that people really care about their retirement. And so how are you going to convince people to get rid of Social Security when they don't really understand how retirement works, which is a fault on the US education system? So that's something that would get a lot of scrutiny, but could save the government a lot of money if they just outsourced it and let businesses run it, privatize it. And so another thing that they could get rid of is, or cut down on, there's a couple things they can cut down on. They can cut down other, obviously, other being what, stimulus? What's 20% of 7.4? It's what? 1.48 trillion. Okay, well, so they could cut down on other, whatever other is, right? It's not, US government, I guess, doesn't have to disclose everything, whatever that means. Small Business Administration, they can cut down on, because I wouldn't recommend businesses who are small to be taking out loans. It's a very bad idea to be taking out loans when you own a small business. And that's $590 billion. You cut that in half, that saves quite a bit of money. The problem with small businesses taking out loans, especially restaurants, is, if your business has a low profit margin, you could be in this debt cycle where you're constantly paying the minimum payment, but you can never really get out of debt. And so small businesses don't generally make that much money because they're small, and not very many small businesses grow to giant empires where they don't really need loans anymore. And so if you have let's say a restaurant, and you make, $80,000 a year, well, that's post, paying your employees and things like that. Well, if a pandemic comes, now you're not even making any money. You're negative 20,000. You take out a $100,000 loan because, PPP, right? How are you going to pay that back when COVID is still around and it's still pegging your business? So yeah, sure, giving small businesses loans helps them in the short run, but now they have this debt and all this stress that they have to manage for who knows how long. So I don't advocate borrowing money. Something else that they could cut down that's very unpopular for a lot of Americans is Department of Defense. And I say that because, we're all gung-ho about protecting the country, protecting our allies. But we don't know where this money is going to, because the DoD has to be secretive. The DoD is not going to tell the whole world what they're up to, because, obviously, China and other competitors, other nations that want to harm us. So cutting down on Department of Defense would help. We probably won't see that because that's kind of frowned upon. And 10%, that's $740 billion. Department of Health and Human Services, that's extra stuff like, Medicare and things like that. And I'm all for Medicare if they can figure out how to balance their budget. And if they can't balance their budget and provide healthcare for all, then they're going to need to privatize it and make companies provide it to all. And they're going to have to regulate them. And they're going to have to regulate prices and price structures, because if you don't regulate prices, there's no way you can have privatized healthcare. But if they can figure it out, they can cut down on costs, they could be more efficient, that would be great. And this is an interesting part about their revenue. If you look at the revenue, $6.3 trillion in 2020. So it was higher estimate than from the balance. But you see that individual income tax and tax withholdings 80%. So 80% comes from the people and only 9% comes from corporations. So this idea that we're going to increase corporate tax rates on corporations to fund things is a fallacy, because corporate tax rates like 24% right now. If you raise it to 27%, that's hardly going to increase how much corporations are paying for things. So there's no way that's going to work. There's no way. So you actually have to tax people more. And that's still not going to work, because people only make so much money. And the only way people are making money is businesses making money. And the only way that money is getting into the economy is either from other nations or from the government printing money. So yeah, that doesn't work. Other revenue is 11%. And one way that they can increase their revenue is by lending out money, which contrary means that they have to print more money if they're going to lend out more. So that can work. I don't know. There's a lot that the government can do. Cut their spending down below what they make, pay it off over time. So let's say they take, and we can do the math now on it now. So let's say they generally spend, the government cuts their spending down to $4 trillion. Okay, and then they increase their income to 5 trillion. So they have 1 trillion left over. And they don't borrow any more money. They don't outrageously print any more money. So we have, let's say we have $27 trillion right now. It would take about 10 years to get to $17 trillion. That's not quite what we need. This could take 27 years to solve, depending on how much they can reduce their spending and increase their revenue. What's most likely going to happen is you can see more stimulus, more printing of US currency, but over time. So, we could get it down to about 9 trillion left, and then print the 9 trillion over the same amount of time that it takes, 17 years or whatnot. So we could have everything paid off in 17 years and not have inflation impact us so much. And that would be the way to do it. And so it should be a combination of reducing spending, increasing income, and stimulus. Otherwise, if it's just purely stimulus, we're going to see mass inflation. But yeah, that would be how the US government fends off from impending doom. And if you would like to see more videos, please check out my channel, subscribe, like the video, share this content if you really liked it. And I appreciate you watching. Have a great day.